Hello, welcome to Module 4, Plan and Creative Activities. There will be weeks where I will do a slideshow, PowerPoint presentation, especially if I feel like there's a lot of terms and concepts that need to be explained. And this week, we're going to talk about some foundational outcomes and concepts that you might see in other classes. So I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood. If there are any kind of questions or needed clarification, hopefully this will provide some clarification. Talking about the first is developmental level, right? And so there are 4 major areas of growth: physical, social, emotional, and intellectual. So we see the most growth in these 4 areas. This is going to serve as a framework on which we organize our knowledge and observation of children, how we come up with lesson plans and creative activities. So one term that you're going to see, and you may have already seen a lot, is developmentally appropriate practice, okay? So that takes into account a children's needs and interests, their developmental level, because we know children develop at different rates, and then available materials and resources that are appropriate for that child's development. So that's what developmentally appropriate practice means. Differentiated instruction, and that is providing different types of learning and experiences and environments to meet children's individual needs, okay? So process learning is another term associated with this. And with process learning, I know some of you have probably had heard process rather than product, especially when you're talking about art. So process learning focuses on providing children experiences that promote that thinking and problem solving without specifically identified outcomes. So like, for example, if I gave children Q-tips, paint, and paper and said, go create whatever you want, that is an example of process learning, whereas products would be, okay, so we're going to make a flower, so make sure you put your stem this way, make sure you put your petals this way, because I specifically want it to look like a flower. That's product. Whereas process, you're giving them those materials and then you're letting them create. This type of instruction also meets a child at their own level of development. It also details the environment to their needs. So if you know that a child is very sensitive to noises, then you're going to create activities that allow that child to be quiet and maybe go to a quiet space. This type of instruction also talks about interacting with children in ways that help them think and solve problems at their own level. So, asking them questions that are very individualized. And it's also making sure the child is gradually using most of his or her senses. So when thinking of activities or lesson planning, think of, okay, how can the child feel in this activity? How can the child smell in this activity? How can the child hear in this activity? And then you're going to want to increase the challenge and manageable, easy steps. That is one of the ways that we keep children interested, is kind of making it a little challenging. And it's going to depend on, the amount of challenge, obviously, is going to be individual based and also based on the age of the child. All right, so attention span and activity patterns. So we want to have reasonable expectations for attention span, right? We don't want to plan an activity for 1-year-olds to sit for 20 minutes. It's just not going to happen. I mean, developmentally, their attention span is not going to last 20 minutes. So a good kind of rule of thumb is the younger the child, the shorter the attention span. Of course, attention span is gradually increased as the child gets older. So you can plan a longer activity for those 4-year-olds than you can for those 1-year-olds. And so activity pattern, especially when thinking of activity, so begin with something familiar or a favorite kind of activity and review a related activity and then introduce a new activity. So for example, if you're in circle time and you're going to talk about tractors, and the week before you just talked about cars, and you would say, hey, you would begin with that familiar activity of cars, and then you relate how the cars and the tractors relate, and then you're going to talk about, that new topic, chapters. And that's just an example of how you can really use to think about activity pattern and, what you've covered with children before as you start to cover new material. A teaching attitude. So I know sometimes as teachers, it's hard to really, avoid telling children the best way to do things, and tolerate small mistakes. I think with that, it's, is it safe? As long as it's safe and not hurting anyone else, certain small mistakes are okay. And resist the temptation to always have quiet and order. I know when I was a teacher, that was a big temptation because I wanted my classroom to be orderly and quiet. But sometimes it's okay to have, moderately noise and activity. That's what makes it fun sometimes. And get involved in working beside children, right? So it's not just kind of sitting back and watching them. Sometimes it's getting into that activity with them, right? So like if they are kind of making music in the music center, it's okay to go over there and sing with them. Or if they're in science center looking at something, then it's okay to go over there and ask questions. And kind of that's, one of the ways that the most teachable moments happen. All right, so guidelines for planning creative activities. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to start going into actually writing activity plans, all right? And so if you are a teacher in a classroom and you're currently writing lesson plans or you're currently writing activities right now, you're probably already doing some of this. So one of the things is try the activity before presenting it to the children. When I was doing my student teaching, I had this outside activity we were going to do with a ball and run and then put it in a bucket, and I had it all figured out in my head, but I didn't try the activity before presenting it to the children. So when I presented it to the children, I realized logistically there were things that didn't work. And I would have realized that if I had tried the activity before presenting it to the children. So especially if it's a new activity that you've never done before, that you've recently come up with, make sure you try it just to, that it work and that it all makes sense. Make sure that you have the necessary equipment available either in your classroom or in your center. Think through the activity. So think through even the most smallest details that you have what you need, and that it's all going to flow. Modify the activity if necessary to meet the developmental needs of the children. So if you are doing a art activity, that involves cutting, this is just an example, you might need to use different types of scissors for children that don't have that fine motor strength yet. So that is just an example of how sometimes activities need to be modified. Briefly explain the activity so the children know how to begin and proceed. So not just like putting the activity on the table or just like putting the activity in the center, just saying go for it. Like briefly explain kind of what the children can do with that activity and kind of model that so they know what to do. All right, when thinking about environment, and so this week you're actually going to either go to environment and critique that environment at a center, or either use the pictures that I have put on Blackboard. So when thinking of an environment, especially the physical environment, you want to make sure that it is safe, right? No one's going to get hurt. There's organization of the space, light, sound, furniture, and that, children can get around. The space makes sense. You're not going to really want to put a noisy center right next to a quiet center. Then you're also going to make sure that interest centers encourage children's creativity and their developing skills. So in the chapter, there's a list of all the centers that you could possibly have and a description of those. So please check that out. It's in your chapter reading. It kind of goes into detail of all those centers. Make sure the environment is appropriate for the child's age and developmental level. When creating the environment, make sure that you can see all the children kind of from one point of view, and then there's not ways that children can hide from you. The environment sometimes needs to be flexible as things change. You might have to move this item or move that item. make sure the traffic flow makes sense, and that you're meeting all those fire marshal standards, and displays, art displays where children can see their art. That's important as well. And your book kind of offers a lot more detail on all of this information, but I just wanted to make sure that I kind of briefly went over it with you. All right. So the final thing that I want to kind of talk about is equipment for creative activities, right? So, the equipment really simple in design, versatile. So it can be used by both girls and boys, and equipment that can be used in different activities is great. Stimulating, so it allows children to do things that are motivating to them, large and easy to use. So sometimes small equipment can, children become anxious because they're not sure how to use it. So sometimes large and easy to use equipment works better. Durable, right? They're children. So you don't want something that's just going to break on the first day or first week of using it. Proper working order. So making sure that it works, making sure it's not broken. Available in proper amounts. So if you have a new kind of exciting toy and you just have one, there's going to be trouble, right? So making sure you have multiple, if you can, is important. And then also designed to encourage children to play together. So there are instances where having something where the children can use together and encourage them to play together, especially if there's a child in your classroom that has special needs, or that a child that has autism, and you're working on those social skills, having a toy that they can play with together. Sometimes that might take some facilitation from you, the teacher, of guiding the children through how to play together with that toy. But having those toys that they can play together is also important. And with any type of equipment or activity, making sure that it is safe for the children to use. So this is just a summary of the module. It's not an exhaustive, of what the chapters cover. But make sure you look at all the videos for this week, that you do your discussion board, and that, you look at the assignment that is coming up on judging a creative active space.